Hello, and welcome back to the history of the Mongols. I'm your host, Kyle. Möngke Khan, the fourth great Khan of the Mongol Empire, entrusted his brother Hulegu with a crucial military expedition in 1253. This campaign would become one of the most detailed and consequential Mongol conquests on record. Hulegu's objectives were formidable: to eliminate the Nizari Ismailis, known in the West as the Assassins, to neutralize the authority of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, and to extend Mongol power into Syria, setting the stage for the pivotal battle at Ain Jalut. Due to the exceptional volume of surviving sources and the campaign's historical significance, we will explore Hulegu's Western expedition in depth, beginning with the dismantling of the so-called Order of Assassins. Hulegu, best remembered for the sack of Baghdad, was the third son of Tolui and Sorghaghtani Beki, making him a younger brother to both Möngke and Kublai. As we noted in previous episodes, Möngke came to power in 1251 with a renewed ambition to complete the Mongol world conquest. To that end, he initiated widespread administrative reforms, tax assessments, and imperial censuses to consolidate resources and manpower across the empire. In 1252, Möngke held a major assembly in Mongolia, laying out the next phase of expansion. He placed two of his brothers at the helm of massive military operations. Kublai was sent southward into the Kingdom of Dali, located in present-day Yunnan, China, as the opening move against the Song dynasty. Hulegu, meanwhile, was dispatched westward with orders to bring the remaining autonomous powers of the Islamic world to heel. These included the Nizari Ismailis, the Kurdish and Luri groups of western Iran, who had long vexed the Great Khan with their persistent raiding, and the Caliph of Baghdad, whose symbolic authority still carried weight across the Islamic world. The precise nature of Hulegu's mandate remains a subject of scholarly debate. According to later chroniclers of the Ilkhanate, the polity that arose from Hulegu's conquests, Möngke had intended for Hulegu to rule the region stretching from the Amu Darya to the Mediterranean as his own ulus, or administrative division of the empire. In this interpretation, Hulegu's domain would serve as a Toluid counterweight to the realms of the Jochids and Chagataids, forming a central axis of Toluid power from east to west. However, this view is not universally accepted. Other contemporary sources suggest that Hulegu's authority was meant to be strictly military and temporary. Rashid al-Din, the Ilkhanid vizier and historian, recounts that Möngke instructed Hulegu to return to Mongolia upon the completion of his mission. Furthermore, Hulegu was required to consult with generals from the other royal lineages, including those of Jochi, Chagatai, and even Ogedei, on major strategic decisions, positioning him as merely a first among equals rather than a sovereign in his own right. Complicating matters, after Möngke's death in 1259, Hulegu began to appropriate territories in Iran, Kuhistan, and the Caucasus that were previously linked to the Jochid branch. The apparent surprise this caused among the Jochids implies that they had not anticipated Hulegu's assertion of lasting authority in the region. In fact, in the early 1250s, Möngke had confirmed land grants in the Caucasus to the Jochids, suggesting he had no intention of entirely stripping them of their traditional holdings. The most plausible scenario is that Möngke envisioned the Middle East and Iran falling under strong central oversight from the imperial court, but without fully displacing the claims of the other branches of the Borjigin family. This nuanced political backdrop set the stage for Hulegu's campaign, not simply a matter of military conquest, but one of dynastic negotiation, imperial governance, and strategic recalibration in the face of competing family interests. So who was Hulegu? Born in 1217, he was the third son of Tolui and a younger brother to both Möngke and Kublai. He was also older than the youngest sibling, Arik Böke. Compared to his more politically prominent brothers, relatively little is known about Hulegu's life prior to Möngke's rise to the throne in 1251. It is likely, however, that he received a comparable education in military affairs and governance. While Möngke was prepared for eventual imperial rule, Hulegu does not appear to have been groomed for high office in the same way. Despite this, Hulegu developed into a complex and formidable figure. Raised in a household steeped in religious diversity, he was exposed to a wide array of beliefs. His mother, Sorghaghtani, was a devout Nestorian Christian, as was his principal wife, Dox Khatun, herself a widow of Tolui. Nevertheless, Hulegu showed personal interest in Buddhism and regularly participated in shamanistic rituals. His fascination with astrology, rather than empirical astronomy, guided many of his decisions, reflecting a worldview in which divine omens shaped political and military choices. Contemporary and near-contemporary sources, even those sympathetic to the Ilkhanids like Rashid al-Din, frequently describe Hulegu's violent temper and heavy drinking. His episodes of uncontrollable rage were notorious and often had lethal consequences. In his later years, he was afflicted by serious health problems, likely exacerbated by alcoholism and possibly epilepsy, as suggested by one source. At the Great Kuriltai convened in 1252, a new phase of Mongol expansion was formalized, the subjugation of Western Asia. Möngke tasked Hulegu with spearheading this campaign. To support him, a veteran commander from Möngke's personal guard, Kitbuka, of the Naiman tribe, and a fellow Nestorian Christian, was appointed as Hulegu's vanguard commander. In August 1252, Kitbuka departed with a force of approximately 12,000 men, initiating operations against the Nizari Ismailis in eastern Iran. Hulegu himself left Mongolia either in the autumn of 1253 or 1254, depending on the source. By this point, the Mongol military machine had reached a staggering scale. Estimates suggest the empire could mobilize close to 1 million nomadic warriors, supplemented by countless more from its vast sedentary subjects. Yet initially, Hulegu was assigned a relatively small core force, possibly only a single Tumen, 10,000 men, in addition to Kitbuka's detachment. As Hulegu advanced westward, however, his army grew dramatically, with reinforcements streaming in from across the empire. Among them were 1,000 Chinese siege engineers and crossbowmen, highly valued for their technical expertise. Former soldiers loyal to the House of Ögedei were conscripted en masse. Buka Temur, leading a detachment of Oirats, joined the march, alongside his sister Guyuk, Hulegu's first senior wife. A grandson of Chagatai, Teguda, brought perhaps 10,000 Chagatai troops. From the Jochid lineage, Batu Khan supplied around 30,000 troops under his kinsmen Balagai, Kuli, and Tutar. Additional Tamar garrison forces from Kashmir and the Caucasus, under Baiju Noyan, were incorporated into the campaign. Furthermore, auxiliary troops were contributed by subordinate rulers across Iran, the Caucasus, and Anatolia, including various sultans, maliks, and atabegs. By the time Hulegu's forces assembled outside Baghdad in early 1258, his army may have numbered at least 150,000 men, if not significantly more. The logistical demands of this operation were immense. Extensive preparations were made to accommodate such a massive force. Roads were cleared, bridges constructed, and boats prepared to facilitate river crossings. Pasture lands along the projected route were reserved specifically for the army's horses and livestock. Massive quantities of flour and wine were requisitioned from subject populations and stored in depots placed at regular intervals along the march. Thanks to the census initiated at the beginning of Möngke's reign, the imperial court had a reliable understanding of regional resources and could coordinate supply lines with unprecedented efficiency. This level of planning underscored not only the scale of Hulegu's army, but also the logistical sophistication of the Mongol imperial apparatus at mid-century. By the autumn of 1255, Hulegu had reached the region of Samarkand, where he paused his advance and remained for approximately 40 days. During this time, he held court and conferred with Mas'ud Beg, the head of the Secretariat for Central Asia. This was no mere social occasion, although ample feasting occurred, but a key moment of logistical planning and regional coordination. Soon afterward, Hulegu moved on to Kish, located roughly 80 kilometers south of Samarkand. Later known as the birthplace of Timur, Kish served as another administrative stop. There, Hulegu met with Arghun Aka, the head of the Secretariat for Iran and Western Asia. These encounters allowed Hulegu to coordinate troop movements, secure vital provisions, and gather intelligence in preparation for the campaign ahead. It was at Kish that messengers were dispatched to Mongol vassals across Iran, summoning them to provide military support and supplies for the looming offensive against the Nizari Ismailis. This brings us to Hulegu's initial target. The Nizari Ismailis, commonly, and misleadingly, referred to in Western literature as the Order of the Assassins. The term assassin is a distortion of their true identity and function. More accurately, they constituted the Nizari Ismaili state, a Shia Muslim community that had established itself in a network of mountain fortresses and settlements spread across three principal regions: Syria, where they held Masyaf and other sites, Kuhistan in eastern Iran, and most importantly, the Alborz Mountains of northwestern Iran. Alamut, the most well-known of their strongholds, served as the political and ideological centre of their leadership. While the regional branches in Kuhistan and Masyaf were governed with a degree of autonomy, they remained under the overarching authority of Alamut. The origins of the Nizari Ismailis trace back to a schism within the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt in the late 11th century. A contested succession over the rightful imam led supporters of one claimant, Nizar, to break away and form their own faction, thus the term Nizari Ismailis. Their distinct Shia beliefs, already considered heterodox by Sunni orthodoxy, further marginalised them. Amidst the political fragmentation of Seljuk Iran, the Ismailis launched a successful revolt. Hassani Sabah, their most famous leader, seized the fortress of Alamut in 1090, while his followers established control over other key sites in Iran, including parts of Kuhistan. Attempts by the Seljuk Sultan Malik Shah to crush the Ismaili movement failed following his sudden death in 1092. This power vacuum and the subsequent disintegration of the Seljuk Empire allowed the Nizaris to entrench their authority in their mountainous redoubts. Economically and militarily outmatched by their neighbours, they turned to asymmetric strategies to survive. Their most famous tactic was targeted political assassination, a method that struck fear into the hearts of rulers and commanders alike. Their first major success was the assassination of the powerful Seljuk vizier Nizam al-Mulk in 1092. These killings were not random acts of violence, but calculated acts of psychological warfare. Assassins would often infiltrate their target's household, sometimes living as servants for extended periods before striking at the opportune moment. In some cases, they would leave symbolic warnings, such as a dagger placed on the pillow of a sleeping official, to remind their enemies that they were always being watched. The threat of assassination, even more than its execution, became an effective deterrent. It bred paranoia and uncertainty among their adversaries. This aura of mystery and terror eventually gave rise to enduring legends. Chief among these was the myth that the Nizaris consumed large amounts of hashish to induce a trance-like state before carrying out their missions. However, there is no reliable evidence for this claim, and it is contradicted by the precision, planning, and patience required for such operations. Still, the term hashishiya, suggesting drug use, entered the lexicon of their enemies, which evolved into the term assassin, as it is commonly known today. The Nizari Ismailis persisted as a distinct and resilient community for over a century. Following the death of the Fatimid claimant Nizar in 1095, no clear successor emerged, prompting Hassani Sabah and his successors to assume both temporal and spiritual leadership of the movement. These leaders, often referred to in medieval Western sources as the Old Man of the Mountain, governed with relative continuity and stability, rarely facing internal succession crises. They developed a unique doctrinal identity while enduring accusations of extreme heresy from Sunni orthodoxy. In 1210, the accession of a new leader, Hassan III, signalled a partial shift in policy. Hassan publicly aligned himself with Sunni Sharia, opening diplomatic channels with the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad and several neighbouring Sunni rulers, including Ozebig, the elder Guzid Atabeg of Azerbaijan, and Muhammad II of Khwarezm. According to the Persian historian Ata Malik Juvaini, who later joined Hulegu's entourage, Hassan III was the first monarch west of the Amu Darya to submit to Genghis Khan. Despite their precarious geographic position, hemmed in by the expanding Khwarezmian Empire, the Ismaili strongholds in the Alborz Mountains and the region of Kuhistan were spared the destruction wrought by the Mongol campaigns. In fact, Kuhistan became something of a sanctuary, a peaceful enclave amidst the broader chaos. The Sunni historian Minhaj al-Siraj Juzjani, a Khwarezmian refugee who initially fled to Kuhistan and later settled in Delhi, spoke of the Ismailis in highly favourable terms, a rare gesture from a staunch Sunni writer. Hassan III's successor, Ala al-Din Muhammad III, reversed the policy of rapprochement with the Abbasids, but maintained diplomatic overtures to the Mongols. When Jalal al-Din Mingburnu, the last Khwarezmian prince, returned to western Iran in the mid-1220s, the Ismailis considered him a threat and allegedly assassinated one of his lieutenants. When the Mongol general Chorma Khan Noyan entered the region in the early 1230s, the Ismailis provided intelligence that proved vital to defeating Jalal al-Din, who was killed in 1231. The precise nature of Mongol-Ismaili relations during the following decade remains opaque. In 1246, Ismaili envoys were present at the coronation of Hülegü Khan in Mongolia, where they were reportedly insulted and dismissed. What exactly transpired is unclear, but historian Timothy May has proposed that the alliance had always been transactional, based on mutual hostility toward the Khwarezmians. With that threat gone, the Mongols had little need for Ismaili cooperation. There is no firm evidence that the Mongols had ever demanded tribute or military service from the Ismailis, and their autonomy may have been tolerated for as long as they were useful. After the death of Jalal al-Din and Chorma Khan, the Mongols appear to have gradually increased pressure on the Ismailis. In the early 1230s, they annexed Damgan, a strategic Ismaili-held city. By 1238, the threat had become so dire that even in distant Europe, news of the Ismailis' desperation reached royal courts. The English monk Matthew Paris recorded that emissaries from the Old Man of the Mountain had arrived in England and France, seeking to forge an alliance between Christian and Muslim powers against the Mongols. They warned King Henry III that, if they themselves could not withstand the attacks of such people, nothing remained to prevent their devastating the countries of the West. Within 3 years, Mongol forces, under Subutai and Batu, would invade Central Europe, crossing the Carpathians and laying waste to Hungary. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, a Mongol commander known as Chagatai Noyan the Lesser may have attempted to impose new demands on the Ismailis, only to be assassinated in the early 1240s. Perhaps meant as a warning or deterrent, the killing backfired. The Ismailis, realising the gravity of the situation, sent representatives to Guyuk's coronation in 1246, in what may have been an attempt to repair the relationship. The Mongols, however, were not known for forgiving such provocations. From this point forward, the destruction of the Ismaili state seems to have become a strategic objective. An actual opportunity to act on this goal did not arise until the reign of Möngke Khan. One of the decisive moments came when the Qadi of Qazvin, a city near the Ismaili stronghold of Alamut, and historically hostile to them, visited Möngke's court. In a dramatic and symbolic gesture, he revealed that he was wearing a suit of chainmail beneath his robes, claiming he lived in constant fear of Ismaili assassins, even in the heart of the Mongol Empire. This anecdote illustrates the extent to which the Ismailis' reputation for targeted killings had penetrated the political consciousness of the time. When the Franciscan missionary William of Rubruck visited the Mongol court in 1253, he reported that rumours were circulating that 400 assassins had been dispatched to kill Möngke himself. Security measures were so strict that all travellers to Karakoram were interrogated. Perceiving the Nizari threat as real and immediate, Möngke ordered Hulegu to eliminate the sect once and for all. By the mid-13th century, the only remaining independent power in the vicinity of the Ismaili stronghold at Alamut was, somewhat ironically, the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Isolated and vulnerable, the Nizari Ismaili stood alone in the face of the immense Mongol force led by Hulegu. In the winter of 1255, as Hulegu approached the borders of Ismaili-controlled Kuhistan, a dramatic change in leadership occurred. Imam Ala al-Din Muhammad was killed, almost certainly at the behest of his young and untested son, Rukn al-Din Khursha. Relations between father and son had long been strained, and there is evidence to suggest that Ala al-Din may have suffered mental decline as news of Hulegu's campaign drew nearer. Believing himself capable of negotiating a way out of the looming catastrophe, Rukn al-Din assumed leadership. His optimism would soon prove tragically misplaced. In the spring of 1256, Hulegu, now commanding a vast and well-organised army, began his formal invasion of Kuhistan. His lieutenant Kit Buka had already spent several years campaigning in the region without lasting success. Though he had briefly captured cities like Tun, the chief city of Ismaili Kuhistan, he could not hold them. The Ismaili mountain fortresses, constructed in remote and naturally defensible locations, resisted even determined assaults. But Hulegu's arrival altered the equation entirely. Sources such as Juvaini and Rashid al-Din vaguely refer to incidents as Hulegu entered the region, likely indicating minor skirmishes or Ismaili raids. Nonetheless, the Mongol military machine was simply overwhelming. Kuhistan's principal cities capitulated within days, and by summer Kitbuka's vanguard had pushed into Mazandaran, while scouting forces advanced toward Alamut. With Kuhistan effectively subdued, Hulegu advanced westward, skirting the arid Dashti Kavir, and arriving at the eastern flank of the Alborz Mountains. Near Damgan stood the fortress of Girdku, which Kitbuka had previously attempted to besiege in May 1253. Hulegu committed additional troops to the effort, but ultimately continued west. Remarkably, Girdku would hold out against the Mongols until 1271, a testament to the resilience of these fortresses when adequately supplied and defended. Meanwhile, Rukn al-Din Kursha had taken refuge in the fortress of Maymundiz, located downstream from Alamut, toward the western reaches of the Alborz range. As Hulegu advanced, he sent envoys demanding Rukn al-Din's unconditional surrender. Understandably anxious, Rukn al-Din sought counsel from his captive advisor, Nasir al-Din Tusi, a polymath, mathematician, and astronomer of formidable intellect and reputation. Tusi, who had lived through Genghis Khan's devastation of the Khwarezmian Empire, quickly recognized that resisting a Mongol siege would likely result in catastrophic loss of life. He therefore urged Rukn al-Din to submit. On his advice, Rukn al-Din dispatched his brother to Hulegu with an offer of submission. The Mongol leader received the envoy cordially and responded by sending a second embassy, demanding that Rukn al-Din demolish the Ismaili fortresses. Rukn al-Din hesitated. In response, Hulegu accelerated his advance. The Ismaili leader attempted to appease the Mongols by abandoning 5 lesser castles and dismantling a few towers at Alamut, Maymundiz, and Lamasar, but these half measures were insufficient. Unbeknownst to him, Rukn al-Din had already become the target of a classic Mongol tactic, the Nerj, or encirclement hunt. Multiple Mongol contingents converged from various directions, cutting off escape routes and systematically eliminating outlying fortifications and settlements as they closed in. Desperate to stall the inevitable, Rukn al-Din sent his son and another brother to negotiate with Hulegu, hoping to delay Mongol action until the onset of winter might hinder further operations. But it was too late. By the 7th of November 1256, 3 Mongol armies had fully encircled Maymundiz. Hulegu required a swift and decisive victory. The logistical strain of maintaining a massive army and its horses was immense, particularly as winter neared and the surrounding landscape had already been heavily depleted. To sustain his forces, Hulegu ordered the delivery of provisions from across Iran and the Caucasus. Fortune, or perhaps fate, was on his side. A mild winter followed, one that did not hinder the Mongol advance toward Maymundiz. Once his armies were fully deployed around the fortress, Hulegu began to assess the battlefield. Like many Nizari Ismaili strongholds, Maymundiz was strategically positioned atop a rugged mountain, its location naturally defensible and difficult to access. Nevertheless, Hulegu had a calculated plan of attack. Hostilities commenced on November 12, 1256. Among the first siege engines deployed were the Kamani Gav, a term found in Persian sources that typically refers to a type of large, mounted Chinese crossbow. These weapons were not designed to breach walls but to target individual defenders from a distance. The historian Atta Malik Juvaini, who accompanied Hulegu during the campaign, vividly described their projectiles as meteoric shafts that burned up the devil-like heretics of Maymundiz, language suggesting awe at their power. Some scholars, like Stephen Hoare, have speculated that Juvaini may have been referring to early gunpowder-based projectiles, possibly even primitive rocket-like devices. However, others caution that Juvaini's penchant for poetic hyperbole makes this interpretation uncertain, particularly given the absence of similar accounts elsewhere in Hulegu's campaigns. By November 17th, Mongol engineers had completed the assembly of their main artillery, and positioned them on elevated terrain near the fortress. While the exact type of engines used is not specified in contemporary records, some historians argue that Hulegu may have employed counterweight trebuchets in addition to traditional traction-powered Chinese catapults. Though written sources remain vague, it is well documented that the Mongols had access to such advanced siege technology by the 1270s, and visual depictions from later that century confirm their usage. Scholars like Michael S. Fulton suggest that the rapid collapse of well-fortified cities and stone-built castles under Hulegu's assault lends credence to the hypothesis that counterweight trebuchets were already in use. Unlike traction trebuchets, which relied on teams of men pulling ropes, these machines used gravitational force, via a heavy counterweight, to launch projectiles with significantly greater range and destructive power. Some also argue that Chinese engineers developed their own version of the counterweight trebuchet, which may have been employed by the Mongols as well, though this remains a topic of scholarly debate. What set the Mongols apart in siege warfare was their ability to maintain continuous bombardment. Their access to large numbers of engineers and specialised labour teams allowed for round-the-clock artillery fire, often from dozens of machines operating simultaneously. For defenders trapped behind the walls, the psychological toll was immense. In addition to stone projectiles, the Mongols used naphtha, a petroleum-based incendiary substance, to ignite fires within the fortress. It is also possible that gunpowder bombs were deployed, further adding to the disorientation of the defenders through their explosive force, unfamiliar sound, and noxious smoke. Within less than a week of sustained assault, Rukn al-Din Kursha surrendered. The fortress of Maymundiz, like so many others that dared to resist the Mongol advance, was promptly destroyed. Hulegu initially treated Rukn al-Din Kursha with a degree of courtesy, though not out of affection, but utility. The Imam's cooperation was key in persuading dozens of Nizari Ismaili fortresses, over 40 in number, to lay down their arms and dismantle their own defences. This saved the Mongols months, perhaps years, of bloody sieges. Yet not all bastions complied. The formidable mountain citadels of Alamut and Lamasar refused to yield. Through Rukn al-Din's mediation, Alamut's defenders eventually accepted surrender terms, capitulating by December 15th, 1256. Hulegu took a brief tour of the legendary fortress, reportedly astonished by the sheer scale of its construction, the vastness of its storerooms, and the ingenuity of its defences. With conquest avoided, he could afford a moment of appreciation. Atta Malik Juvaini, the historian accompanying Hulegu, received permission to rescue select manuscripts from Alamut's renowned library before the remainder were consigned to flames. Lamasar, more defiant, held out for another year before finally falling. Rukn al-Din remained in Hulegu's camp throughout the dismantling of the Ismaili state in Persia. The Mongol leader indulged him with gifts, including a Mongol wife, and chances to watch his beloved sport of camel wrestling. Yet Hulegu harboured no real fondness for the man. The alliance had been purely transactional. Once Rukn al-Din's utility had run its course, Hulegu sent him east to Karakorum in early 1257, passing the burden to the great Khan Möngke. Rashid al-Din tells us that when Möngke was informed of the Kursha's arrival, he was unimpressed, scoffing, "Why are they bringing him and tiring a horse uselessly?" The verdict was immediate: execution. Upon hearing this, Hulegu ordered the rest of Rukn al-Din's captive family executed as well, sparing only a young son. Ismaili sources later claimed that another son survived in hiding, secretly raised as the next imam. However, this account remained a minority belief and was never widely accepted. With that, the Nizari Ismaili state effectively ceased to exist in Persia by the end of 1256. A few isolated garrisons persisted, and the strongholds in Syria had yet to face Mongol wrath, but the backbone of the movement had been shattered. Hulegu had completed the first major objective of his campaign. In the next episode, we will follow him into the next phase. After wintering near Lamasar and Kazvin, he turns west in early 1257, setting his sights on the crown jewel of the Islamic world, Baghdad, seat of the 500-year-old Abbasid Caliphate. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the history of the Mongols. If you're enjoying the series and want to help support it, you could like the video, make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, and leave a comment to let me know where in the world you are listening from. Thank you, and see you all next time.